global perspective. And from Hong Kong, we are joined by Kenneth Curtis, who's founding partner at Themes Investment Management, former VC at Goldman Sachs. Thank you very much, Mr. Curtis, for giving us your time this morning. And also joining us from Singapore this morning is the global strategic of Deutsche Bank and very respected economist in his own right, Sanjeev Sanyal. Good morning, Sanjeev. Nice to have you in Singapore. So Singapore and Hong Kong lined up here on Budget Day Live. Mr. Curtis, what do you think the Indian government should do? What do you think the Indian government should correct, rather? Yes.
Well, the Indian government's got itself in a really difficult situation. You have a slowing economy. You have a budget deficit that is way overshooting the government's target. You have a trade deficit in spite of the currency being extremely weak and the economy slowing. The trade deficit's getting worse. Inflation has come down, but we're still running very high inflation at 6 to 7%. And we have political blockages. So all of this creates an extremely difficult situation for the finance minister as he steps up to deliver the budget today. One thing they've got to focus on is how do you reduce the government deficit? And I think one thing they have to look there at is the special tax cuts that were adopted in the face of the global financial crisis of 2007-2008, which has resulted in the tax receipts falling to only 10% of GDP, 10.5% versus 12% where they were before the crisis. I think that has to be addressed. And I think at the same time, given where oil prices are, the drain of subsidies for oil across the economy is going to be very high this year. So I think the government really has to think carefully about maintaining the subsidies at these high levels.
Well, that's a pretty tall order, and we are also heading towards. But do you think the government in India has today, any options? Because here,
I think there are some
in India, domestically, the political pressure is only growing.
But number one, could cut the subsidies to some extent. Number two, they could take the emergency tax cut away because that's no longer needed. And the good news is, I think, is that the leading indicators who are telling us where the economy is going to be in 6, 9, 12 months, they're starting to bottom. So I think over the summer into the fall, we will look back and say that this is the worst part. This is the darkest moment for the economy, and that things will start to climb in the right direction over the second half of the year. So you can't just take where we are today. We've got to project forward, and I think that's a more positive story for the economy than we have at the moment. But you're right, the government is really in a corner, particularly given that the government has had some difficulty in recent state elections, and of course is looking to the next national elections with some concern.
You've really launched the debate well. It's going to be interesting, Kenneth Curtis, what you say, because we'll be joined by spokespersons of the Congress party in just a couple of minutes. Abhishek Manu Singhvi is also joining us live. Sanjeev, do you think that tall order which Kenneth Curtis has put out, from your understanding of the domestic political pressures as well, that Pranab Mukherjee will be able to bite the bullet this time? Sanjeev?
Yeah.
Sanjeev, do you think that tall order that Kenneth Curtis just laid out, do you think Pranab Mukherjee will be able to bite the bullet? Do you think he can cut subsidies given the political pressures that are on this government?
I think at the end of the day, the one lesson we have learned from the experiences of Greece and other European countries is that you can run deficits for long periods of time, and then when fiscal things come to a head, they really begin to bite. So I think at some point, India has got to get serious about its fiscal house and get things in order. Absolutely agree with Ken that we need to do something about the taxes, begin to increase the tax to GDP ratio very significantly. And in that space, I think we will need to look at direct taxes, perhaps a new code, massive simplification, lowering the tax rates, and generally begin to get serious about increasing the tax to GDP ratio. Of course, on the other side of the balance sheet, there is also the issue about subsidies and handouts of all kinds. It's not just about the quantum of these subsidies, but also about the efficiency with which they are administered. So there's a huge number of things that we need to look at, and I think this has to be done very, very quickly.
Sanjeev, do you think to keep the India story alive, there are some couple of things that Pranab Mukherjee could do today, and what's the expectations globally from the Indian budget?
I think the expectations globally should be the same as those from the domestic investors and business, which is that the tax system needs to be radically simplified, and you need to administer the subsidies in a much more rationalized way. But of course, we need to be careful. The budget is ultimately a fiscal exercise. There are many other things relating to general governance and administration that also need to be done, which I think you shouldn't expect the budget to suddenly begin to resolve all of these issues. But yes, a strong and clear message from the budget would certainly help the case along.
Well, Sanjeev and Kenneth, do stay on with us. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, good morning. Zarnab here. Welcome to Budget Day Live. Dr. Singhvi, everybody is saying here today, and therefore the question goes out to you, including our guest from Hong Kong, Kenneth Curtis, who I want actually Kenneth to also come into the discussion with you. Everybody is saying this is the time for you to take some tough measures. Our panel is almost completely agreed, Dr. Singhvi, that you need to be very, very careful on the subsidy front. And that you cannot afford this kind of profligacy in terms of social sector spending. Sorry for using that word, but many people view this as excessive profligacy right now on the social sector spending front. Dr. Singhvi, is your government in a position to bite the bullet and take those tough decisions today?
Arnab, let me start by saying that everybody here, I think, recognizes that if there is the safest pair of hands which can handle this situation, which of course has its pluses and minuses, it is Pranab Mukherjee. And not only in terms of crisis management, but in terms of far-sightedness, wisdom, foresight. I think that's a very good starting point. Number two, to come to the specifics, as far as subsidies are concerned, yes, I think no government in India, given the disparities, can do a blanket approach. We cannot do it in one fell swoop. But the basic principle of progressively, in a calibrated, targeted manner, reducing them and keeping the essential ones going is accepted unequivocally by this government. Let me give you some examples. I mean, we have no hesitation in increasing what you might consider to be a subsidy as far as food is concerned. We believe that's important. But equally, we have bitten the bullet for petrol. We have moved in naphtha and fertilizer areas, and we should do something, there is common consent, on diesel. Maybe we shouldn't do it for kerosene at the moment. So these are calibrated individual decisions, and I think each time, not only in budget but pre-budget as well, you see a movement. I want to make one other point. I think this government also is clearly committed to reform, Finance Minister and the government. And the reform has to be measured not only by the achievement but by the clear declaration, the clear bringing to Parliament or into the public domain very significant points of reform. But ultimately you can't clap with one hand. You need the rest of the country in terms of opposition states and our allies to realize that for several of these federal issues, you need to clap with two hands. So I don't think people should have doubted our intention to bring on reform measures on the table. But they have not always been implemented, or the implementation has taken longer. Just one second. Take the GST. Take the GST scheme. Take even the FDI and retail. Our intent, our well-measured, well-intentioned desire is there. But in a federal polity under the Constitution, to clap with two hands. So I think there everybody must contribute to the national wheel.
So we've sparked a debate from our panel. FDI and retail does not require parliamentary approval. GST, many people blame your government for being unable to build a political consensus over the years and not
giving the compensation.
And not giving the compensation. So Swapan Dasgupta is first responding to what you're saying here. Dr. Singhvi, go ahead. Swapan Dasgupta, go ahead.
I know. I think Abhishek thinks that the federal structure in India is an impediment to growth rather than seeing it as an opportunity of growth.
I can't hear him at all.
The classic example.
I can't hear him
I think
at all.
that's what you more or less hinted.
I'll paraphrase what he's saying. Swapan Dasgupta is saying that in his view, he said Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi believes that the federal structure is an impediment to growth. That is what he said there. I just want him to complete his comment and then I'll paraphrase it again in case you can't hear.
I think
Swapan
classic
Dasgupta.
My friend
example
Tapan is a master at oversimplification and perhaps distortion.
No, it
Gentlemen.
is. And
Gentlemen.
you are a master at concealing what you really think.
Ask your question.
Ask
The point about the CST, the goods and services tax, the main
Gentlemen,
impediment that is there
clearly the
now
government
exists
can't do everything.
only because
You know, we've
there
got
is
to
a
also
lack
think of the
will
private
on the
sector.
part of the central government to give the adequate compensatory package to the states. Do you deny that? Because the other modalities have really been sorted out.
You have to do the translation job, Arnab. I'm hearing nothing of what he's saying. You have to tell me. I can't hear him at all.
Tell me in a nugget. Tell me in a nugget.
Dr. Singhvi, what Swapan Dasgupta is saying that the compensation package for CST to the states is something that the government needs to do, and that's the only impediment to the GST.
Navika, there is a cacophony of voices coming there. 4 voices coming. I can't understand you. What is this?
1 second. Our guest from Hong Kong also wanted to come into the debate. I think Kenneth Curtis, go right in. Kenneth Curtis,
Well,
go
if
right
the-
in.
if the
Kenneth
fi-
Curtis's question.
If the finance minister has as much energy as all of us do in this debate, he will do very well today. But the reality is that India's competitive position globally is falling dramatically. The trade deficit last year was $133 billion. It's running at substantially higher than that the first 2 months this year. Exports are extremely weak. Imports are booming. And what the government, I think, has to do is unleash the private sector and make very big supply-side reforms that will release growth in this economy, get the infrastructure investment starting, allow companies to be more competitive by cutting back on the red tape. You know, that doesn't cost money directly. It takes some political capital to get there, but that will generate higher revenues for the government, higher growth, better employment, and help enormously get this economy moving. I think the focus that everything has to come from the government is wrong. I think a lot more has to be pushed down into the private sector, into the real economy, and just let this thing roar as it can. Don't forget, India has potential,
Okay.
8.5%, 9.5% growth.
Dr. Singhvi.
It's growing at 6.5%, 7% at the moment.